Welcome back to Local Decision 2020. I'm Rusty Ray, and we are joined now by the incumbent state senator out of District 31, that is Senator Michelle Benson. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
What a time to be in office. What a time to be running for office.
And to be chair of a health committee.
Certainly.
It's been something I never could have imagined. It's just a great privilege to get to serve and be in this role and try to do the next right thing with every single decision.
What are the big decisions in that role specifically? And they affect so many things, right? Business, public safety perhaps, policies that shape when things can proceed as normal or need to be shifted. Is that kind of what that's about, or is there more to it than that?
Well, some of it is a balance of supporting our healthcare infrastructure, making sure the Department of Human Services is accountable and transparent to the people of Minnesota. Early on, end of February, I had two calls. Dr. Mike Osterholm, who was the state epidemiologist and is now at the University of Minnesota, and he walked me through what previous coronavirus pandemics had looked like and what we might be looking for. And I learned R0 very early on, community spread. And then I talked to Fairview, which is one of 10 infectious disease hospitals. I talked to them the next day and what they needed to do to gear up. They were telling me all of the things that they needed to have in place, ECMO machines and ventilators, the amount of staff that they were going to have to gear up. And so very early on, I started working with my colleagues in the House and in the administration to push forward a significant funding package to make sure that our hospitals had ventilators. As soon as tests were available, our hospitals could buy them, pay staff extra if they were working in an infectious environment, if they needed to convert facilities to negative airflow rooms. So from essentially February 28th forward, COVID has been the center of my work at the Capitol.
And continuing, it sounds like you believe that there will be a lot of recovering from this, even if there is some sort of larger public health answer, let's say, and there,
yes,
things do change and things can get back opening and things like that. You feel like the state, economically especially, is going to spend a great deal of time recovering from this, and you are looking for ways to aid in that and allow for people to work from home more often if that's
right,
better for them and things like that, right?
So our economy was stable, growing
right,
quite well prior to the presence of COVID, the epidemic here in Minnesota and the pandemic globally. And so we think those structures remain in place. There are significant concerns. Hospitality Minnesota estimates that 40% of our hospitality industry is in peril of closing permanently. So all of those jobs going away. So how do we quickly, safely normalize and get people working in those environments again? When we look at telecommuting, it, like never before, we accelerated the good work that can be done distance. And I think there'll be some advantages to our smaller towns that have good broadband infrastructure, good upload and download speeds. Even here in Senate District 31, there are places that don't have good upload and download speeds. And so for us to be an effective commuter, telecommuting sort of community and have people back home doing work here in the district is an important policy initiative. And then obviously public safety through the civil unrest. It happened in downtown Minneapolis. We need to emphasize that law and order, not violence from police officers, but law and order is necessary for economies to stay stable.
What kinds of things can the state legislature do in order to address that specifically in public safety concerns or the approach of policing overall? What kind of things can be done in St. Paul?
And we did pass a significant police reform package. A few of the things that I thought were especially important: mental health treatment for officers. And people will say, well, why do you think that's important? The accumulation of years of being at people's worst moments. And if there's a suicide, it is law enforcement that shows up first. And they don't do that just once. They do it day after day. If there's a child who's drowned, law enforcement shows up first. And so there's been kind of an attitude, we saw it in the military, that you just suck it up and you get through it. And I think it's important that we say, you know what, it's important and okay to talk about how difficult your job is in a private environment with somebody who can help you work through those issues. So I thought that was important. Changing the way officers are trained in dealing with mental health and autism, so that if somebody is autistic, perhaps nonverbal, not following instructions, helping officers understand how to work in that environment so we reduce the risk of conflict in mental health and environments where there might be someone with autism. So there were a lot of really practical changes. Was fortunate to have Sheriff Stewart as somebody I could call and say, are we in the right direction? He said, yes, these are things that are workable, and I think a lot of law enforcement was already doing those good things.
In your leadership role within the Senate, as the summer kind of wore on and the emergency and executive powers continued from the governor, at first it seemed like, okay, we've got to get to a certain point, and we all understand that we're all in this together. But the partisanship really has come out, it seems, as the special sessions have continued, including most recently another halting of a nomination and a person in the governor's cabinet, or the governor had selected for a leadership role, denied at the state house, at the state capitol. That partisanship going to continue, even as the governor says, I'm going to continue these executive powers, given some thresholds he laid out in a couple of press articles last week.
Sure.
Is that partisanship on the minds of people that you're talking to in your district, saying, when is this going to change? Is this going to get better? Do some people?
I don't think a lot of people are aware of the commissioner process, so let me just help the viewers and you. I was fortunate to be in a meeting with the governor and the two chairs of the committees that were impacted by these commissioners. That meeting was in February. We said to the governor privately, candidly, we don't think these two individuals are a good fit for this work in Minnesota. Please help them find something else. Please bring us somebody who, better engages stakeholders. We gave some very specific reasons. And what we had planned to do in March was to have public hearings and see if we could again make changes for the benefit of stakeholders and Minnesotans. COVID came in and all of those got set aside. So we did have hearings this summer, and we followed through with our commitment that commissioners should be given adequate time to change, that stakeholders should be listened to, but if they are not doing the work that's necessary after those conversations, then they need to be moved on. And so we started with two commissioners in February who were clearly a year into the governor's term, not meeting those criteria. So this wasn't arbitrary, this wasn't retribution, this was our job to review the commissioners, and if they're not doing their job, we ask them to move on by taking a vote publicly on the Senate floor. Yes, the environment is more partisan. It's an election year. When we started working on the COVID crisis, very collaborative, March, April, May, but as the legislature was constitutionally put out of session, it was much harder to get the governor's staff to engage. And we would ask, so what are you working on here? What's your position on testing for nursing homes, for example, testings for critical infrastructure? And so it became much harder to take the voices of our constituents' concerns from Minnesota and get those delivered into a place where we thought they were heard. And we think the reason for stepping back from emergency powers is so that we can be more collaborative. A significant number of the governor's emergency powers in the Department of Human Services and the Department of Health were put into law and extended 60 days beyond the end of the emergency so that we could have a planful transition. That's how collaboratively we were working. I believe we can do it again.
What do you feel like COVID has pushed aside? Anything that you were working on maybe early part of this year? Anything that you see that could have made some extremely marked progress this year in St. Paul? Is there anything that you hope to continue in the new year, even as COVID continues, even as as I said a moment ago, recovery continues? Are there major initiatives close to your personal interest or the interest of the state that you want to see move forward?
Well, I was working pretty significantly on an alternative pathway for prescription drugs. So being able to safely import from Canada, Ireland, Israel, so that we could have good prices at the point of sale. But also, and I've talked about this publicly a couple of times, there are rebates built into the prices that Minnesotans will see at the point of sale, but the insurance company or the pharmacy benefit manager get the rebates. Well, the Trump administration authorized a second pathway that you could go around the PBM and around your insurance company and get the net rebate price at the point of sale. And so those were two significant things that got backburnered. I hope to be able to bring them back as a significant part of this policy discussion.
What else, looking ahead, could we still see a bonding bill? People are looking at things that were talked about as the process for bonding every other year comes about, and tours around the state by state lawmakers looking at what projects could be put up and could be invested by the state. Is it possible to have that? Is it possible still this year to maybe have that process go through?
I am hopeful, but as we get closer and closer to the election, I am less confident. I think if we did a basic blocking and tackling, roads and bridges, the governor wanted a significant amount of money for clean water. Republicans agree, so let's do that. Transportation bonds, some housing bonds to make sure that people are still working on building affordable housing. Let's take out some of the things that were controversial. Funding for light rail, funding for the casino train to go up north. The governor had asked for some cash assistance for theaters. Well, the theaters aren't open. Should we really be giving cash assistance there when we're facing a more than $6 billion deficit? And so let's take out the things we disagree about, work on the things we can agree on, make sure that our workforce has good work to look forward to in the pipeline. We've seen a significant decrease in the pipeline for Minnesota's construction industry. So let's help our economy recover with some of those common sense agreed upon bonding projects.
This huge budget deficit opened up after a year began with a forecasted surplus.
We had a surplus.
Of quite a bit. What can the state do to address that, again, moving into the future and looking to rebuild some of these things? Do you have an idea of the best way to help make up for that?
Good. Well, and as I said before, our economy was in pretty good shape when we started this year, pre-COVID. So getting people back to work, getting our economy stabilized is the fastest way to mitigate that deficit. However, I don't know that we're going to be able to mitigate $6 billion in projected deficit before January, February, March, when we have to start making budget decisions. And so we're going to have to start making some pretty serious decisions. I know a lot of people talk about taxing the rich. There isn't enough tax capacity in our top tier. And our top tier is already higher than Massachusetts. There's not enough tax capacity at the corporate level. So we're going to have to think really thoughtfully about how we actually resolve $6 billion. We had asked the governor, starting in April or May, that he ask his commissioners to make cuts. And the governor didn't take us up on that offer. That would have been $100 million in savings per month, starting in May, June, July. So you can do the math. How much would that have saved us by making not too painful cuts that had been made in the Dayton administration and the Pawlenty administration, put us in a better position as we come back in January to balance this budget.
Well, whoever convenes in January will have quite a bit of work to do, it
Yes,
sounds
they
like,
will.
and examining those and making those decisions that, again, every other year, part of this budget process.
Yes.
All right. Michelle, that's all the time we have for now. I appreciate it very much.
I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you, and I hope everyone stays well.